Tell me if what y'all see on the page too. Let me see. All right, we are in the building with Kamjiverse, the genetic footprints of Kemet. Ooh, it's about to go down. I'm Juice. I got my popcorn. Kamjiverse, you in the building?
Yeah, we here live in full effect.
Yes, sir. So I want to let a few people roll in. You know, normally I play a few songs on my channel. And so I just want to take that time to ask you a few questions. The primary question is, what prompted you to put together a presentation on the genetic footprints of Kemet?
Well, I just think it's important to continue the work of the great scholars that preceded us and many scholars who are around today. Speaking about Sheikh Anta Job, Theophilo Banga, Joseph Kizerbo, all of the above. And I think that it's important that we continue their work in all fields of knowledge, especially genetics. There's a lot of propaganda, trying to separate Kemet from the African world. And it would behoove us to be responsible and be able to put out the right information.
I'm with you on that. I seen a good presentation by one of my brothers, Robert Brown, the other day, and he just got me inspired to go back and put the information in the format that's well digestible and so that people can get at it. I see a few people rolling in the building right now. Mr. Wembley, Barn Dog, Lou Gal, what's up? Sadiq in the building, Pharaoh, Montu, Yurik, that's what's up. But I mean, this is, since I anticipate this stream to have high rewatch or replay value, I don't think we need to really wait and hold off until we got a full house. All right, and so
Mm-hmm.
if you will, you got the floor. Let us know what you got going on. I'm gonna fall back and hit mute. Need anything from me? Let me know.
So I'm gonna get a quick glass of water
Oh yeah,
before I
well we
begin.
still in the building. Any other archers in the building? Y'all can sound off if y'all in the building. We got some time. You know what I'm saying?
It's all in the building. Let's get it.
You feel me? Just chilling, right? Just trying to feel them. Let my man get some water real quick. Matter of fact, let me get the soundboard so I could. Is there any way that you? Let me pull this out. Yeah. Oh, Sadiq, you on point. Sadiq, all right, there we go. All over the place. Yeah, we need to see them arrows in the chat too.
Hey.
You there?
Yeah, I'm here. Shout out to Sun Lion in my chat. This is a joint collab with Kamji and Smash Rock Wellington. About to kill the game on the genetic footprints of Kemet, and let's get it.
So my show is the Smash Rockwell channel for all the people watching on the Kamjiverse channel. And what's your channel, Kamji?
My channel is Kamjiverse. We talk about, the African world, the African diaspora, and the continent. And we link ourselves to classical Africa and ancient Kimi and Kush
Word
in
up.
every single way, all fields of knowledge.
Word up. So without further ado, let's see this presentation.
All right, this is a presentation on the genetic footprints of Kemet, and we're going to get into the place of Kemet in the modern African world. This is a very, very contentious topic, as we discussed before, because of all the people pushing propaganda against the Black world. And the reason why Kemet is important, and it's important for us to elucidate these connections, is because this is about self determination. This is about Black autonomy, right? Without accurately connecting ourselves to our classical civilizations, it's impossible for us to develop in the modern world. That's why what I'm doing, Smash and the Archers are doing, all of the Magi, is super, super important for future generations. So I'm going to go over certain definitions that I'm finna use in this presentation. The first two actually come from Shamar Kikeda, and Shamar Kikeda spoke about the racism in the term sub-Saharan African. I'm sure a lot of y'all have heard that ancient Kemites weren't sub-Saharan African, and there's all types of adjectives and phrases that people try to replace that with. But these terms, conceptualized by Dr. Shamar Kikeda, basically speaks about the derivation of different African populations from above the Saharan zone, which would be super-Saharan Africa, and this would be more so like northern Africans or coastal Mediterranean African populations, and then infra-Saharan Africans would be Africans derived from below the Saharan zone. Now, the important part about these two definitions is the fact that blackness is encapsulated within both. And we're going to get into that. We're going to get into what Shamarka Keita conceptualized in his paper in Oxford as Diopian blackness. Diopian blackness is super important, right? So the next is Kimi, and Kimi is the vocalization of the modern Coptic name for Kemet, right? And as you all who have been following, Smash Rockwell and his excellent, sourcing of Crumb's Coptic dictionary, where he reveals that, Kame or Kemi, is one of the versions that the Coptic people today use for their ancient civilization. And then you have the Happy River Basin, which Happy is one of the indigenous names, along with Itru for the Nile, which the Nile would be in Arabic and Greek for the Nile River. But in this presentation, you will see Happy River Basin extensively. So first, when we talk about genetics, we have to be forefront. We have to be honest with what we're talking about, because a lot of people consider genetics to be immutable, genetics to be perfect, and genetics to be a field where you can, without any type of reasonable doubt, discern what happened within population history. Now, most genetics tests use what's called principal component analysis. And principal component analysis is not perfect. It's actually flawed in many ways, right? According to an article by Elhan Elhaik on principal component analysis, he deals with some of these topics, right? And it's considered the gold standard in genome-wide studies for clustering individuals. There's a demand for large sample sizes in population genetics, which has led to outsourcing of analyses to direct to consumer companies, right? So in many cases, a lot of companies who do genetic testing outsource their analysis to these for profit companies. And there's some concerns about the methodological transparency, because all of y'all know when you're dealing with, any type of academic research, you have to be clear cut on the methodology that you're using so that, those who are reviewing that analysis can discern whether it's true or false, right? So there's no consensus on the number of principal components to analyze. Those of you who are familiar with admixture graphs for populations, you may see K equals 1, K equals 2, K equals 3, K equals 4, etc. And as you go higher on the K factor, you get a more in-depth picture of the population, right? Now, there's no specific consensus. So within the field, people don't know what is the right level of K to use in population analysis, which there's varied approaches among researchers because of this, right? And it's affected by factors such as marker choice, sample selection, implementation details, making making replication of results difficult, right? So there is some misusage about principal component analysis when it comes to drawing historical conclusions. And there's a big discussion with El Haik because through his research and through his compilation, he actually confirmed that the European Jews or the Ashkenazim, the Khazarians, do not primarily descend from ancient Israelites. And this was an extremely controversial topic within, modern Jewish society because that's their claim to fame in terms of connecting themselves with the Bible, with that land, establishing a historical basis for Zionism. So it's really, really controversial. But according to El Haik's analysis, it just doesn't stand up, to muster, right? So the reliability, robustness, and reproducibility of PCA and population genetics are being assessed due to their role as a first hypothesis generator. And it has been confirmed by the study of El Haik and his peers that PCA cannot derive correct conclusions without prior knowledge, in the sense that you need, predetermined historical knowledge, linguistic knowledge, archaeological knowledge to inform the principal component analysis in order to be able to derive an accurate conclusion. And it also fails to perform well in simple settings, leading to contradictions and absurd conclusions, right? And in one of my previous presentations, I mentioned how like there's a lot of matrix mathematics involved in PCA, and if you really wanted to, you could use PCA to prove anything, which is why, as these scholars noted in the source below, you need external corroborating data. Now, not all haplogroup predictors are created equal. An example of this is the NevGen haplogroup predictor is a lot less accurate than the with-Athy haplogroup predictor on various populations. And on the graph to the right, you can see the common prediction of the haplogroups in green, with Athy in yellow, and then NevGen in blue, right? And this is another thing in the sense that it's important that you get the right calculator. If you use NevGen, you may find out that Ramses is haplogroup J or haplogroup some G or R, right? When in most studies, most published peer-reviewed academic studies confirm that he was E1B1A or EM2, the one that's most common in infra-Saharan Africans. So it's important that you find the haplogroup predictor that is the most accurate, right? Now we're getting into the limits of phylogeny, and there's three different definitions that are important. Genealogical ancestry, genetic ancestry, and genetic data are not the same. Genealogical ancestry are ancestors that you could identify, whereas genetic ancestry is an abstract hypothetical rendering of the inheritance of one's genes. And then genetic data is genetic similarities from admixture studies. Now, it could be the case that you have some African Americans or some West Africans who are the descendants of ancient Kemet, and that particular descendancy is not discernible, from genetic testing because in most cases there's a 10 generation barrier for most genetic tests, which is 250 to 300 years, right? So you may not find all the genes that you had, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, but we're going to get into the evidence of them.
All right.
Facts, right? And again, bias sampling. There's a lack of sampling among non-European populations, right? So if you look at the graph to the right, you can see the ancestry category distribution of studies. So in most studies are about Europeans when they're about 8% of the planet. And then most individuals, 80% of those sampled are Europeans. And most of the classified genetic markers are Eurasian. So just off the bat, from bias sampling and bias classifications, there are biases against Africans, within genetic testing. And to supplement that, you may need to use some correction factors with respect to each bias in order to get more accurate results. Now you have some issues with the molecular clock. There's changing generation time issues, population differences in comparative analysis, species specific differences, say Homo sapien versus Homo sapien or archaic humans. There's functional changes in proteins, and there's changes in the intensity of natural selection. All of these factors, affect the accuracy of the molecular clock. And then Bayesianism in the philosophy of genetics is something that has been discussed. And Dr. Bunge in the International Review of Victimology has reviewed Bayesianism, and he confirmed or basically determined that it's more pseudoscientific than scientific as it applies to a lot of these statistical fields because it assigns probabilities to statements, it conceives probabilities as subjectives, and it invokes probabilities in the absence of randomness. And according to Mario Bunge's analysis, that is not the most accurate way. And in the graph to the right, you could see the equation used for Bayesian studies. So now we're going to get into why you should not take genetics alone without external corroboration. The famous Abusir Malek study, the study that everybody and their mama has been using to try to claim that ancient Kemet was white Arab. The ancient Kemet ain't had nothing to do with black folks. Well, it's fraudulent. We know that it's a complete fraud. Thanks to Dr. Jean-Philippe Grodin and his brother and Dr. Shamar Kikeda, who studied a critical review of ancient DNA studies in Kemet. And they came up with these 10 principles to show why the Abusir Malek and any preceding study are fraudulent. right? Because there was actually a new study that didn't even address the majority of these concerns. So all the samples are from one sepot or nome in northern Kemi, representing 2.4% of all sepots. So Abusir Malek only covered 2.4% of the available administrative districts of the civilization. The mummies represented a foreign West Asian population in Kemet. Scholars, Egyptologists, such as Dr. Vanessa Davies, have confirmed that. She said, why are you using a foreign West Asian population? Why don't you use a population where historical records have confirmed were indigenous? But obviously, you know why. Y'all know why, right? The timeline that they had isn't representative of ancient Remenkimi history. 3,000 years is missing: pre-dynastic, early dynastic, old kingdom, middle kingdom. The samples cannot be convincingly said to represent true breeding populations. Abusir is only a maternal study for the most part. It didn't use any paternal markers, no autosomal analysis, etc. And authors use Bayesian reconstruction of population sizes changes through BEAST, right, which is Bayesian analysis, for which there is a general discrepancy between the marginal prior and the original prior distribution. The available info on the comparison between the original and the marginal priors and on prior and posterior distributions does not consider possible population substructure. So he's basically referring to this graph that we see here. And what he's saying is that that type of analysis doesn't cover for the historical evolution of that population with respect to time. And we know, from archaeological analysis and linguistic analysis that the founding population of dynastic Kemi came from the south. That's without a shadow of doubt. Again, sex bias sampling from mtDNA, the whole genome sample size is too small to accurately permit a discussion of all Remenkimi populations. They only had 3 full genomes. 3. They're using 3 genomes as a representative of a 4,000 year civilization from the pre-dynastic period. That's insane. That's insane. And the study ignores historical reasons for the presence of Near East genetic material in ancient Remenkimi remains, such as diplomats, prisoners of war, Asiatic wives and concubines who were gifted to Remenkimi royals. So we know why there are foreigners there. We know why. We know why. You're acting as if no one had records of these foreigners there, right? It's obvious. And the authors ignored PCR methods and STR markers from autosomal DNA samples that reveal that the ancient Remenkimi people share about 95% affinity with inter-African populations. And oftentimes genetic markers that exist among Africans and Eurasians, like M1 on the maternal side, are classified as Eurasian, even though Africans contain them first. And M1, by most accounts, is believed to have originated on the African continent as an African marker. So now you have Shamarki Keita's top affiliator analysis, and you can see that most of the ancient Remenkimi from the Armana period are overwhelmingly infra-Saharan African, or in the Western parlance, sub-Saharan African, overwhelmingly. And this is autosomal, the majority of our ancestry, of our genetics. So there are ethical problems. There are Egyptologists who have confirmed that there are ethical problems. In research, ethos is just as important as pathos and logos, right? Logos, from the logical part of the information, pathos from, some of the emotional and passionate aspects of the information, and then ethics. According to Dr. Vanessa Davies, the Schunemann Abusir study used flawed genetic inferences to propose that ancient Kemet's lineage primarily stemmed from Levantine and Eurasian populations. And she likened it to the genetic version of Flinders Petrie's invading pharaonic race theory. This is a professional Egyptologist who called the Abusir Malek study the genetic version of the invading pharaonic race theory, which was a white supremacist, Hamiticist model about the creation of African civilizations. Vanessa Davies.
Emotional damage.
Dr. Vanessa Davies. Dr. Vanessa Davies, an Egyptologist, deemed it irresponsible, racist, and damaging. That's what she called the Abusir study. This is a white woman, a white Egyptologist, called this study racist and damaging, noting the inadequacy of the small sample size to draw generalized conclusions on the topic. Now you have Takabuti, and you have Dr. Angela Stein affirms that the study on Takabuti, being reported as H4A and more European than African, is part of a racist and conservative legacy of making ancient Kimi a white civilization. This is a white female Egyptologist saying that this study is part of a racist agenda to make ancient Kimi white. The European scholars who reported on this completely ignored the context of migrations and the presence of Eurasian immigrants in Northeast Africa during the late period. Now, in response to this, the head curator of the museum displaying Takabuti with this genetic research, Hannah Crowdy, confirmed that Takabuti was not white and that her ancestors may not have always lived in ancient Kimi or ancient Kemet. So again, when you see these genetic markers, most of the professionals in the field are saying these are foreigners. These Eurasian markers they're not the indigenous population. This is what the professionals are saying, right? Now you have the Modaman mistake. And then you have Dr. Ellen Calloway's analysis of genetic studies on the Modaman, right? And they revealed some calculation errors that invalidate the assumption of massive Eurasian ancestry on the African continent. Before, the Modaman was found to harbor Neanderthal ancestry. But after Calloway came in, is like, nah, he found that the Modaman did not harbor any Neanderthal ancestry. And on the right, you see the Ari boy, which scholars believe the Moda man to be most closely associated with from Ethiopia. These so-called foraging, Afro-Asiatic populations. But as many of you know who follow Theophilo Benga, a lot of these Greenbergian language phyla are invalid, but that's not the subject of this presentation. But this is an Ari boy from Ethiopia. You see his face. This is who Moda man is believed to be close to. Zero Neanderthal ancestry, right? So then you have this possible Coptic component, right? And this is by Dr. Dobin et al. And he analyzed, and we talked about it before, about the K factor with PCA, and there's not necessarily a consensus on the right K factor to use, right? Now at K equal 4, he found a Coptic component which may be indicative of Egyptian ancestry without Arabic influence. But as you can see from the graph at K equals 4, that dark green, the Beja, Ethiopians, Nuba, Fulani, Darfurians, Maasai, and Luya also have some of this ancestry, right? So if these modern Copts, as we know, who are heavily mixed with Eurasians, right? If they harbor ancient Egyptian ancestry via Dobin's Coptic component, so do the Beja Ethiopians, Nuba, Fulani, Darfurians, Maasai, and Luya, according to that analysis.
Drop the mic. All right.
So now you have this tricky ancient Lebanese study. And, to the right, you see some reconstructed faces from Abusir Malek of these foreign Eurasians, right? Now, there was a study that showed that ancient Levantine populations were more similar to ancient Egyptians than modern African populations. The problem was that they used JK2888, which came from Abusir Malek and which is estimated to live around 97 to 2 BC in the late period. Absolutely not representative of the founders of dynastic Kimi, not even in the slightest, right? So you have tricky studies who do this, but it's important to consider chronology, as my dude Pan African James always speaks about. Chronology is important because if you talk about late period, of course Arabs, some Eurasian populations will be similar to the late period. That's obvious. So let's get into the arabization of Kemet. Believe it or not, many genetic experts speak about the arabization period of Kemet. For those who deny that there was never an incursion of Eurasian admixture in the modern Egyptians or the ancient Egyptians, there was an arabization period, according to Dr. Sarah El Kamel, right? So she studied North African and Middle Eastern populations, and she discerned, right, that there was a recent gene flow from the East dating back to the Arab conquest period. The demographic migration and Arabization process that submerged the original Berber language and customs seems to be accompanied by substantial gene flow and genetic admixture. And to the right, you see modern Egyptian, models, celebrities, Aya Rauf and Munez Abdul Rauf, right? Sisters. And as you can see, they are a reflection of that Arabization period. And again, some of these North Africans, especially the super Saharan Mediterranean coastal North Africans, they have Arabization admixture, Arabization ancestry as well. So to act as if they've always been to act as if they've always been there without any type of admixture with the Arab world is a lie. Let's move on. Dr. Lara R. Arauna. Again, she has a study reveals the patterns of North Africa, including the Arabization of Egypt in the 7th century. And according to that study, modern Egyptians have the lowest indigenous North African ancestry. The lowest indigenous North African ancestry of these populations are modern Egyptians. And as you can see, in that chart to the right, the blue and the green are Eurasian ancestry. The gray would be more so quote unquote Yoruba ancestry. And the orange would be that original North African, Paleolithic Tafarot, so to speak, ancestry. And if you look at that chart, modern Egyptians have the lowest amount. They're not indigenous North Africans. They're not. They're just you can clearly see that Syrian blue, they're 95% Syrian in this study, in this Arabization study. Again, by Dr. Lara Arauna, geneticist. Now you have Dr. Pagani, and he shows Arab admixture in modern Egyptians and Ethiopians dated 750 years ago, consistent with the Islamic expansion. It specifically showed 80% non-African ancestry in modern Egyptians. When this is masked out, the Egyptian genome clusters closer to modern Yoruba in West Africa than they do to Eurasian populations. So when you look at the Arab ancestry, you look at it in the Egyptians, you take it out, you take the Arab ancestry out of the Egyptian, out of an ancient Kemite, and you got a Yoruba. And you have a Yoruba. Fatality. I mean, come on. It's obvious. It's obvious that the people there were mixed with the invaders, right? So now you have inner Africans populated Kemet. Dr. Shamarka Keita connects the presence of EM35 in Kemet to the Pleistocene migration northward. And furthermore, he associates EM2 in Kemet, exemplified by figures like Ramses III of the 20th dynasty, with inner African Happy River Basin populations, suggesting their role in the origin of the first pastoral cultures on the continent. So Shamarka Keita, when he looks at the genetics of ancient Kemet, he's like, the founders came from the south. And as you can see, 19th century Sudanese Bayesian man looking like he came straight out of East Oakland. He looked like Detroit. He looked like Chicago. He looked like Bankhead. He looked like the Bronx. He looked like Philly, North Philly, South Philly. He looked like Dallas. He looked like all the brothers and sisters that you may find in the diaspora, right? And this is a population who is still in Egypt today. So it's obvious the founders came from the South. Shamarka Keita, boom. Now you have a study on the peopling of the Green Sahara, as well as an analysis of Paleolithic DNA from West Eurasia. and it reveals that the Ibero-Maurusians contributed to the Natufian population rather than the other way around. And from the study, you can see that Fulanis are 30% Ibero-Maurusian, and the Yoruba are 13% Ibero-Maurusian. So this study is showing that modern West African populations are deriving from these ancestral North Africans. So those of y'all who try to, separate West Africa from North Africa, to separate ancient Kimi from West Africa, this is fraudulent. This is a fraud. And this study also shows that there is a contribution in West Africa from the period of Shabaka of the 25th dynasty, right? They see a contribution from the 25th dynasty into modern West Africans, right? And this corresponds again with the majority of the orature, the majority of the oral narratives who speak about, ancient Kemetic populations who were invaded by the Persians, by Darius, and they started migrating along the tributaries of the Wadi Hawar and along the tributaries of the Lake Chad Basin into Western and Central Africa. The genetics matches perfectly with the oral testimonies. So now you have some maternal analysis of Berber, so-called Amazigh, of the Siwa Oasis, reveal a high frequency of M1, LOA1, L3I, L4, and L4B2, which show that they are more closely related to infra-Saharan Africans than Eurasians, right? And then you have a 2018 study on Jehudi Nakht, which showed that his maternal lineage was U5B2B5. And he was linked to Berber, Fulani, and Senegambian, West African populations, such as the Papel. This is a West African population that has the same lineage maternally as Jehudi Nakht. And as you can see, this beautiful sister, this beautiful Amazigh, indigenous North African sister from modern Egypt, right? And you can clearly see the predominant inter-African ancestry. This is the face of these original Paleolithic back migrations, of the original ancestral North African. Just because we're talking about a supra-Saharan African or a northern coastal indigenous African, don't mean we ain't talking about our own people. They were obviously Black people, obviously inter-Africans, and the genetic study of the Amazigh in the Siwa Oasis in modern Egypt proves this. So here we have a study by Holfelder et al. On genomic variation in Northeast Africa, and it reveals that modern Egyptian Copts and Arabs have the most Neanderthal genes of any population. Both Copts and Egyptian Arabs, shout out to Pan-African James, both Copts and Egyptian Arabs were estimated to be 70% European and related to the Linia Bandaramic culture of Germany from 5500 to 4500 BCE. So these populations obviously came in recently. And look at Coptic father Anthony Murad on the right. He is a reflection of that 70% European ancestry observed in modern Egyptian Arabs and Copts, according to Holfelder. Now you have I'm gonna butcher her name, but Zakarzuski, and she shows craniometric analysis showing that the Kerma population is more closely related to the founders of dynastic Kimi than the populations of the late period who experienced mixing with Mediterranean populations. So when they compared the late period, the same Abusir period, to the original founders of dynastic Kemet, the skulls don't match. The craniometric analysis doesn't match. Then you have a study by Mani et al., right, on Y chromosome analysis in Egypt reveals that the genomic profile of modern Egyptians is not identical to the ancient Egyptians and that they have ancestry from recent Eurasian migrations. In the Journal of Human Biology from Dr. Mani, right? He's showing, looking at the genomic profile, look at this modern Egyptian man on the right. When you look at it from a genomic perspective, they're more identical to Eurasians. They are not the ancient population. So all y'all claiming that, the modern Egyptians are the ancient Egyptians, these genomic studies prove you absolutely false. Absolutely false. So then, according to Shamarka Keita, modern cosmopolitan northern Egypt is less likely to have a population representative of the core indigenous population of the most ancient times, right? So you're looking at northern Egypt. Shamarka Keita talks about Kleins, and he talks about the genetic ancestry in the south being more representative of the modern population, right? And shout out to James, and yeah, we got Awakened Black Hetero saying the recent flooding of the United Arab Emirates is not a fluke, it's a punishment. I'm just reading some of the comments on my channel. Salute some more. That good guy. Shout out to everybody in the building. We finna keep this pushing. So, genetic research conducted by Dr. Hassan et al. Reveals the presence of the Y-DNA BM60 haplogroup among Sudanese Copts. So if y'all trying to use the Copts as a representative of the ancients, use the ones in the Sudan because they have BM60, which is also found among the Bamileke of Cameroon and the Mossi of Burkina Faso. This lineage is associated with infra-Saharan Africans who originated in the Middle Happy River Valley and migrated northward and founded dynastic Kimi. So then you have Schlubusch et al., and they discovered a two-way migration spanning 3,000 to 1,000 years ago, right? Connecting West African populations with the Happy River Basin across the Sahel Belt. And you can see that blue-green here, right? They even have these Eurasian incursions 1,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago in Ethiopia, and then even some of those Paleolithic back migrations that we will discuss, 15 to 10,000 years ago. So now you have the Sahelian autosomal corridor, and we've spoken about this before. Sahelian populations from the east to the west are unified with the SPA2 gene for spermatogenesis, for good loving and making babies. You have the keratin and hair follicle differentiation genes on KRT 39 and KRT 40 on chromosome 17, and then the pig gene on chromosome 4 involved in the attachment of a cell surface protein to the cell membrane. So if you look at populations across the Sahel, and as you can see, on the right you have the maternal side on the top and the paternal side on the bottom. The gray being African ancestry, the yellow being Eurasian, and on the bottom the red being Eurasian ancestry, and the blue being African. You can see that the Sahelians from the east to the west are unified with these sex chromosomal aspects and with these autosomal markers. So then you have Dr. K. Wang et al.'s kinase domain receptor analysis, which reveals that East African pastoralists descend from ancient Kushite populations that migrated south. This matches the distribution of the East African lactase persistence marker into Central and Southern Africa. And as you can see on the right, you have that East African allele in the red, that 14010C, and you can see the Southern African populations have a lactase persistence that came from their ancient Kushite ancestors, their ancient East African pastoralist ancestors from Northeast Africa. And we're going to get into that. Now you have Nancy Bird et al., and their study asserts that the Lake Chad Basin was a connecting point for the populations from East and Western Africa. And I've corresponded with her before, and she agrees with this affirmation in the sense that modern West African populations, West and Central African populations, are linked with ancient Kimi via the Kanem Empire, right? This is a geneticist that has confirmed this. And if you look to the right, you can see this Egyptian component in Cameroon grass fields, in the Tikar, in Eastern Nigerians, particularly the Igbo. You can see that component migrated into modern West and Central Africans. And you can also see on the right the arrow that indicates that migration. That's arrow 3 in the top right of the chart. And you have Dr. Chaudhry et al.'s research indicates that the Barone people have East African ancestry closely linked to populations in the Lake Chad Basin like the Tera. Additionally, the study reveals that the Wolof people in West Africa share close genetic ties with East African populations such as the Oromo. These findings are consistent with the traditions of the Igala and Galadwala people who have oral testimonies who trace their royal dynasties back to their Zagawa ancestors, particularly in the empire of Kanem Bornu. Kanem is the intermediary point between ancient Kimi and modern West Africa. And according to Dr. Chaudhry et al.'s analysis shows Wolof clustering with the Oromo, Oromo people having that same Teta-related, Zagaba-related ancestry. And then there's also corroborating data showing that the Fulani can be conceptualized as Tikar, right? Who have a deep Pleistocenic root with the Mercy population of ancient Ethiopia. 77% of the Tikar genome in Cameroon is related to the Mercy of Ethiopia, right? So the Fulani can be conceptualized as 50% Tikar and 50% Amhara. And the Amhara are also in Ethiopia, Semitic speakers of Ethiopia. Now, according to the research of Dr. Hana Hara, the populations of ancient Kemet, share zygomatic traits. You look at the zygomatic bone on the cheek with infra-Saharan African populations that are not seen among modern North Africans and Eurasians. The zygomatic bone of ancient Kimi was inter-African. That trait that they have is not seen in modern Eurasians and North Africans. For all y'all who say that the modern Egyptians or the ancient Egyptians, zygomatic traits prove you damn wrong. You wrong on that.
Fatality.
Now, Dr. Zakarzuski, right? Susan Zakarzuski, and her study shows that the body plan comparing intermembral, brachial, and crural indices, right? Shows that the Egyptians exhibited a super negroid body plan. Super negroid, according to this analysis. Not Eurasian, not North African, not Anatolian, Levantine, Mujan. No, super negroid with longer distal limb segments relative to proximal segments compared to many modern African populations. So they're saying ancient Kemet was more black than even certain modern African populations, according to their body anatomy. And as you can see, you look at these skull binding traditions in Tutankhamun and modern Western Central Africans, you could obviously see that they're from the same people, and you could even see that reflected in the art. So again, Dr. Shamarka Keita's analysis of dental, cranial, brachial, crural, and intermembral indices, these are anatomical indices on the body, reveal that the populations of pre-dynastic and dynastic Kimi had tropical body proportions closely related to modern Africans and African Americans. And you can see in this chart on the top right, the ancient Egyptians, Black Americans, the so-called pygmies, the Melanesians, they cluster together when you look at their body anatomy. They are the same populations. They come from the same ancestry. This is clear from Shamarka Keita's analysis. Shamarka Keita agrees with the Magi archers.
Finish him. Fatality.
Moving on, you got a study from Dr. Makota et al., who studied the mummies, ancient Kemetic mummies. And she got tissue samples from Kemetic mummies in Upper Egypt. And he confirmed that the melanin levels in the Kemetic nobles were similar to those of Negroid people, right? The study looked at different tissue structures like the hair follicles, sweat glands, and blood vessels. And additionally, they checked for fungi to see how much the tissues had decayed over time. So basically, this study, right, found melanin-rich cells in these mummies. They did Diop's melanin dosage test, and they confirmed an African origin. These were dark-skinned people, according to the study of the mummies. And you see a mummy of great King Ramesses III in the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization in Cairo. So now let's look at the pastoral domesticates, right? These pastoral domesticates firmly connect the populations of Western Central Africa with ancient Kimi, firmly. Look at the domestic fowl or the chicken, Gallus forma domestica. Early evidence in ancient Kimi, middle second millennium BCE, and then it gets to infra-Saharan West Africa, late 6th century AD. Then you have the helmeted guinea fowl, right? And its earliest found are in infra-Saharan West Africa, but many scholars believe that it migrated from the Nuba Hills and the Kordofanian region of the Sudan. Then you have the dog, Canis lupus forma familiaris, first found in the 6th millennia BCE, Northeast Africa, right? And its earliest finds in infra-Saharan West Africa occur in the Gajigana phase, 1200 to 1000 BC. Then you have Equus africanus forma asinus, or the donkey. Earliest finds in Africa, second half of the 4th millennium BCE in ancient Kimi. And then infra-Saharan West Africa, it's found from the first year to 250 AD. And you have Equus forma cabulus, or the horse. Earliest finds in Africa, second intermediate period of ancient Kimi. Earliest finds in infra-Saharan West Africa, 8th century AD. Then you have Sus scorfa, forma domestica, or the pig, the African pig. Earliest finds in Africa, 5th millennia BC in ancient Kimi, and then it arrives in West Africa, possibly with Europeans or in the early 2nd millennia AD. You have the dromedary, Camelus thomasi forma dromedarius. Earliest finds in Africa, 1st millennia BC in ancient Kimi, and the earliest finds in infra-Saharan West Africa, 250 to 400. Ovis amen forma aries, or the sheep, and then the Capra agagris forma hircus, or the goat, found in 6th millennia BCE Kimi, and then 2200 to 850 BC in West Africa. Bos primigenius forma taurus and the Senga cattle. Earliest finds in Africa are disputed but secure, 6000 BC, and then infra-Saharan Africa from 2200 to 850 BC. So you can see the migration of these pastoral populations. Then you have the Zebu cattle, or Bos primigenius forma indicus. Earliest finds are New Kingdom Kimi in 1569, and then earliest finds in infra-Saharan West Africa, possibly 800 to 1400 AD. So now let's get into the paleobotanical analysis. And this analysis, according to Dr. Roger Blench, establishes an indisputable, not disputable, indisputable link between ancient Kimi and West Africa. You have Citrullus lanitus, or the watermelon, from West Africa in King Tutankhamun's tomb. King Tutankhamun was slurping on West African watermelon, right? Then you have Cajun, or pigeon pea, likely originated in West Africa, but then spread to the happy. Indigna inguiculata, or the cowpea, West African origin, or 2 origin centers in the West and the East. Then you have Ricinus communis, or castor bean, which originated in East Africa around Somalia and Ethiopia, and then spread to West Africa. Then you have Abel muscus esculentus, or okra. All y'all who ate okra with fufu this morning, that originated in Abyssinia and is now found throughout the African continent. Then you have Abris precatorius, or jumble beads, in Moringa oleifera, traded from East to West Africa via ancient Kimi. You have Tamarindus indica, or the benoil tree. It's found wild in Western Central Africa and eventually spread to East Africa. Then you have sesame, which originated in West Africa and spread to ancient Kimi. Then you have Carthamus tinctorius, or safflower, possibly originated in Ethiopia or Central Africa before spreading to ancient Kimi. Then you have Oryza glaberrima, or rice, originated in West Central Africa, and then its Oryza barthi wild species is found in the Nile Valley. And you have Vitellaria paradoxa, or she tree, natural to the Sudano-Sahelian belt, as well as Central Africa. Then you have Dioscorea rotundata, or the yam, originated in West Africa, yams, and then spread to Central Africa. Its cousin, Dioscorea abyssinica, is found in Eastern Africa. You have Digitaria exilis in West Africa, originates from Digitaria longiflora in East Africa. Then you have Dr. Dietmar Staverding's analysis of human pathogens called schistosomes. And they reveal a migration from the Great Lakes region, at the foot of the mountains of the moon where the god Happy dwells. And they migrated to the Happy River Delta and then subsequently migrated to West, Central, and Southern Africa. And you can see that trail on the right, red arrow to the top, blue arrow to the side, green arrow down. Shout out to Michaela Dawson in the chat. Shout out to No BS in the chat. Shout out to my man Pan African James in the chat and all the we getting in, we going in, we ain't done yet. Then you have Dr. Jean-Philippe Gourdin's analysis of tuberculosis in the Middle Kingdom of ancient Kemet reveals the presence of West African L5 and L6 strains, establishing a strong link between dynastic Kemet and modern West Africans. In the Middle Kingdom, they had West African tuberculosis. In the Middle Kingdom, according to Jean-Philippe Gourdin. And then you have his analysis of the spread of leprosy. And I actually mixed up the slides here. On this chart right here, you see the spread of leprosy in the world. And here is a sickle cell anemia chart of the HBS Benin sickle cell haplotype. But all of this is from Jean-Philippe Gourdin. So his analysis of leprosy during the Egyptian late period at Abusir Malek, that Schunemann study, reveals strains belonging to the 3L genotype that is found in modern West Africa and Brazil among Afro-Brazilians. And this strain also clusters close to the S15 genotype in Martinique in the Caribbean. So you had leprosy from the late period clustering with the diaspora. And this right here is the tuberculosis chart, right? So Jean-Philippe Gourdin's analysis of sickle cell anemia in pre-dynastic Kemet reveals a Holocene population expansion 7,300 years ago from infra-Saharan Africa to the northern Happy River Delta. And that's this right here. So going back to this chart, this page, a slide where I said L5 and L6, as you can see here, L5 and L6 is in Senegambia, right? So that's the green and the yellow right there, you know, in terms of the tuberculosis lineages. So elephantiasis, a condition marked by severe lime swelling, has been observed in ancient Kemet and the Nok culture. Archaeological evidence such as ceramics and pastoral data indicate a westward population movement from the Wadi Huwar to the Lake Chad Basin, connecting the populations of the Happy River Valley to northern Nigeria. And this is the incidence of elephantiasis caused by lymphatic filariasis. This is a pathogen. This is seen in ancient Kemet. Look at where it's found. Tropical Africa, infra-Saharan Africa. Let's go. So if we look at Lipsenitz study, you know, of African foragers, modern West Africans are much more closely related to Modaman in ancient Ethiopia than the Shumlaka foragers of ancient Cameroon. And you can see that on that chart here. You see that green right there, number 3. That's modern West Africans, right? And then you see Moda in the orange. So the green, modern West and Central Africans, are much more closely related to Moda than Shumlaka of ancient West Africa, meaning that there was a population replacement. Moving on. So within conventional genetics, there are 2 models for the origin of modern West Africans. You have the out of East Africa model, that Ethiopian model on the top, right? And you can obviously see right here, West Africa B is the majority of modern West Africans, and it's more closely related to Modaman, 4500 BP, right? The West Africa A, which is allegedly the archaic genome, is only 9% or 13% here, right? Then you have the differential admixture model. And in that model, there's an isolation by distance, but there's introgressions interregionally across the African continent. So even if you want to argue that West Africans and East Africans and Central Africans and South Africans have been separate, you know, since the Pleistocene, there has been introgressions across different regions of the continent, different regions, even in the most conservative estimate. But as you can see, the autosomal study aligns more with D here on the right, which is the out of East Africa model. For modern West Africans, the majority of the genome of modern West Africans, which would be about 91%, is related to Modaman in Ethiopia 4,500 years ago. Firmly aligning with the Ethiopian migration model. Y'all was trying to say Diop was debunked. Diop ain't never been debunked, bruh. Diop was on point. Diop was on point with this. Now you have Diallo, Dr. Diallo, and Dr. Mame Diallo is a student of Sheikh Anta Diop at Sheikh Anta Diop University, right? And he's been pushing the Diopian consciousness and these Diopian migration models through genetics and archaeology. His analysis of circum-Saharan maternal lineage reveals that modern West Africans are connected to both pre-dynastic and dynastic Kimi via intracontinental pastoral migrations from Northeast Africa to the Western Sahel during the late Holocene, 4,200 years ago. And you can see that on the chart to the right. These West African Sahelian farmers and pastoralists get ancestry from Eastern North African pastoralists and East North African farmers. Right? Then you have Shiskova's analysis of maternal genetic structure in the Sahelo-Savannah belt reveals a pattern of haplotype sharing between Eastern and West African pastoralists, commencing in pre-dynastic Happy River Basin and intensifying notably in the 7th century during the onset of the Islamic period. So the instability of Eurasian invasions into Africa caused Africans to collaborate with each other and mix with each other, as is shown in this chart to the right. And for those who follow Greenbergian models, you could see the Afro-Asiatic, Nilo-Saharan, and Niger-Congo populations have shared ancestry in that middle Venn diagram. So Africans have been mixing for millennia, as we are obviously know. So then you have autosomal analysis reveals a close genetic relationship between populations from the Happy River Basin, such as the Dinka, Nuer, and the Romo, and modern West Africans like the Ewe and the Shanti. This supports the Diopian migration model, which details the connections between these populations and the Pharaonic civilization. And to the right, you can see beautiful models, one from Wolof in Senegambia and the other from the Dinka in Sudan. They look like they could be the same. Come on, huh? And they try to say that Diop been debunked. They try to say that Diop is outdated. The new scholars of today, Dr. Musa Lam, Dr. Hamadi Bukoum, Dr. Mame Diallo, Dr. Nasir Sari, Dr. Obadeli Cambone, they've been confirming Diop since day one. Y'all just are anti-African, so you don't follow African scholars. That's why y'all ain't never had this information. So, according to Busby et al., modern West Africans have Sudanic ancestry from the Happy River Basin that reflects a migration across the Sahel around 2,000 years ago, corresponding with these West African oral narratives. And you can see that on the chart to the right. Migrating from the Sudan and Ethiopia into West Africa, right? It's just so obvious. When we look at it, look at Cerny et al. And Knight, and they show that the Mandinka people and the populations of the Lake Chad Basin of northern Cameroon share a close genetic relationship with the Upper Egyptians from the Gurna Oasis. This relationship stems from their common descent from an ancient East African group that belonged to the L3F3 maternal lineage and migrated to West Africa around 6,000 years ago. So, Mandinka, northern Cameroonian populations related to Upper Egyptians from the Gurna Oasis, according to Cerny et al. Then you have Dr. Alexandra Rosa et al.'s analysis of maternal lineages in Guinea-Bissau. Reveals the M1 marker associated with Kushites from East Africa who migrated to West Africa 2,000 years ago. Kemetic nobles, Nakdank and Knumnankt from the 12th dynasty had the M1A1 maternal lineage. So you find Guinea-Bissau and West Africa have a Northeast African Kushite maternal lineage in M1A and M1A1. They done. They ain't got no comeback to this. How they finna come back to this? They have no comeback. Ain't no comeback. They done. I mean, at this point, I feel like I'm beating a dead Equus form of Cabulus. I'm beating a dead horse. Now we got Cerny et al. And Dr. Bertoni et al. And they reveal that in the Imohag, the Tuareg population, the EM81 lineage associated with the Berbers is observed among 90% among the Tuareg of the Tahal in Libya. The Tahal Tuareg in Libya have 90% of ancient North African ancestry. And this back migration mtDNA H1 frequency is observed among the Libyan Faison Tuareg 61%. These Imohag have 61% H1, right? So they are the image of the ancient North African. These black North African, these black Tuaregs, right? They're more closely related to the Beja people in the Happy River Basin. And they diverged from a common ancestor in North Africa around 5,000 years ago, right? So just because you're talking about a back migration or a super Saharan African doesn't mean that you ain't talking about black folks. Because these Imohag, these dark skinned Imohag Tuareg populations, right? And we saw that in the Siwa sister earlier, they have upwards of 90% and 61% of this ancient, back migrating, ancient North African Tafarat haplogroup. So even when you're talking about the presence of haplogroups K and H, right, in Northern Africa, they don't mask out the predominant infra-Saharan African ancestry. And there are various populations in modern Ethiopia who have haplogroup K and H, right? So these findings of K and H, and then these findings of K and H with respect to the autosomal analysis support the findings of Dr. Kade et al. That reveal the incorporation of Levantine agricultural items into an indigenous African foraging strategy that eventually evolved into a unique African mode of food production. So look at it. Even though you had the incorporation of Levantine agricultural items and some Levantine chromosomes, sex chromosomes, the predominant foraging strategy, mode of production, and autosomal profile was from infra-Saharan Africa. So then, according to Hassan et al., his study on Y DNA haplogroups in the Sudan, the presence of F, G, I, J, and K in Northeast Africa can be attributed to recent migrations from West Asia and Europe and are unrelated to the founders of dynastic Kimi. So when they be trying to use F, G, I, J, and K, acting like it was some white Arabs, it was from Eurasians who founded dynastic Kimi, according to the experts like Dr. Hassan et al., that ain't come from the founders of dynastic Kimi. It was from Eurasians. They were incursions. They're unrelated to the founders of the pharaonic civilization. So let's look at haplogroup R, right? The majority of ancient Kemetic Y-DNA RV88 lineages, including those identified among the suit Tutankhamun and the suit Amenhotep III, are subclades of RV1589 and RV1944 marker from the Lake Chad Basin. According to the geneticist Dr. Eugenio D'Adanazio, ancient Central Africans carrying this marker migrated to the Happy River Delta during the mid-Holocene. And as you can see, that R lineage that spread to, Egypt, and most modern Egyptians who have RV69 subclade. That was from the Lake Chad Basin. That was from ancient Central Africa. They done ain't no more using R. Y'all can't use R. R in ancient Kimi came from Chad. And then you have D'Adanazio's genetic analysis of trans-Saharan paternal lineage, and it reveals a mid-Holocene migration of Central Africans carrying AM13 subclades from the Lake Chad Basin to Northeast Africa approximately 7,500 years ago. Shout out to Moon2 2.0. They've been coming back and say they've been saying the same thing. Yeah, many Akan Kings narrated this info. Shout out to No BS. Shout out to everybody in the building. Magi Archer, stand up. We ain't done yet. And you got this study, right? Ancient Kimi and Kush is genetically related to Central and Southern Africa through the EM35 subclade EV1515. According to the phylogeographic analysis of Dr. Trombetta et al., EV1515 originated in Northeast Africa and then spread southward during the pastoral Neolithic period, where it is represented by its downstream subclade EM293. So if you look at this chart to the right here, you see EM293 in Central and Southern Africa along the Swahili coast. That is a descendant of EV1515 or EM35 star from Northeast Africa. And it was carried to Central and Southern Africa by pastoralists linked to ancient Kimi and Kush. So then you have D'Adanazio et al. Again talking about, EM78 subclades, right? So ancient Kimi is genetically linked to contemporary West African populations through trans-Saharan lineages. So you have ECTS693 and EV6873 migrated from Northeast Africa to West Africa approximately 6 to 5,000 years ago. And you can see that on the chart here. You can see ECTS693, the third on the bottom, and that is predominant in West African populations like the Soninke founders of the Ouagadougou Empire. And then you also have a subclade of 32, EV32, which is EV6873, and that also migrated from Northeast Africa to West Africa 6 to 5,000 years ago. And you have EM2 subclades such as EZ15941, EL516, and EV5001 originated in the Lake Chad Basin, then spread north from 10,000 to 4,000 years ago, followed by a massive movement south into infra-Saharan Africa. So all of them haplogroups that you see right here, they originated in Northeast Africa in EM4727, right over there, and then they migrated southward after 4,000 years ago, basically, corresponding with dynastic Kemet in the Middle Kingdom, right? So these haplogroups right here, the majority of, Central and Western Central Africans have EL516 and its relatives and EL485. So all of them are associated with a migration from North Africa, particularly Northeast Africa, after the desiccation of the Saharan zone. So then you have Dr. Jean-Philippe Gourdin et al.'s research on the canine mesial ridge and pre-dynastic Amradian culture samples at Adaima in Upper Egypt around 4000 BCE. And in modern Adaima populations, they got the mtDNA lineage LOF, right? So LOF connects ancient Kimi pre-dynastically with Southern Africans. So there's a deep-rooted connection between Southern Africans and modern Southern Africans in ancient, Kemetic populations, Kushite populations, because of LOF in modern Egypt and the canine mesial ridge, which is mostly found. It's a dental feature found among the so-called Kowena or San populations of Southern Africa. It's also called the Bushman canine, but Bushman is more of a derogatory term, so we use in canine mesial ridge. Then you have Dr. Teresa Rito et al.'s analysis of mtDNA LOA1 subclades in Africa indicates an origin in East Africa with a subsequent spread to Central and West Africa during the terminal Pleistocene. And that aligns with Babacar Sal's research that details the Happy River Basin populations migrated to the Sahara during the start of the African humid period. And you can see the distribution of LOA1B1A3 to the right. And additionally, if you look at LOA1B1A3, there's a migration from the Sahara to the Nile Valley during the dynastic period, followed by a dispersal to West Africa, right? And this corresponds with Dr. Musa Lamb's archaeological model that reveals the Saharan roots of the Pharaonic civilization with Neo-Pharaonic civilizations in modern Africa. So LOA1B1A3 is connecting Nigerian populations, Cameroonian populations with ancient Kimi. Then you have Augustin Hole, which he also did analysis on Lake Chad Basin populations and L3F3 maternal lineage, indicating that they spread westward across the Wadi Hawar from the Happy River Basin. And around 3,700 years ago, these migrants arrived in Chad, establishing an indisputable link between the civilizations of classical Africa and modern West Africa. Then you have the distribution of mtDNA L2A2 subclades, and they correspond with the southward expansion of agro-pastoral populations from Northeast Africa. This validates Galanjam oral narratives, which assert that the Central African dynasties, including the Luba, Lunda, Kuba, and Congo, trace their origins back to the classical Happy River Basin. So you got modern Congolese populations. You have L2A2A1 subclades, and they are linked and they descend from the ancient Sudan and Upper Kimi. You have Dr. Diallo et al.'s research on circum-Saharan maternal lineages reveal that the N1 haplogroup, right, is connected to migrations from Northeast Africa into infra-Saharan Africa. And N1 came into Africa via back migration from the Ba el Mandab, and it is prevalent in Eastern Africa and the Sahelo Savannah Belt. And you can see N1 here on the chart to the right, N1A distribution from East Africa into Central Africa. And now we're dealing with these subclades, right? So we got the EM35 subclade EFT321625. That's E1B1B1A2A. And it's found in the first dynasty of ancient Kemet. And its subclade in EY161140 is found in Cameroon and validates a migration from ancient Kemet to Western Central Africa, right? So this corroborates with Jojoni Tukamp's archaeogenetic analysis of a biology origin of the Bamileke. And the autosomal profile of the Bamileke clusters closer to Sudanic people than so-called Bantu populations. And you can see these subclades on the chart to the right. Then we have genome-wide analysis, right, of Cameroonian populations validates the Central African Bedi oral narratives that affirm a Sudanic origin of Galanjan peoples. So you see these subclades connecting, these Central African populations and Southern African populations with ancient Kemet, right? And in that chart, that admixture chart, they're basically tracing migrations, into Africa, and they found that the Bamileke, who are a Sudanic population, are the best representative of the origin of the so-called Bantu migration. So even for those who follow the Greenbergian linguistic phyla, the Bantu population is Sudanic with respect to this analysis. So then you have EM2 subclades from pre-dynastic Kemet among the Nguni people of Southern Africa, and they validated classical Happy River Valley origin of the Nguni lineage. You can see all them subclades to the right over there. You see among the Swati and Eswatini, the Herero in Namibia, the modern Swana of Botswana, and the Zulu of Azania. They have haplogroups connected to that EL516 and EL485 that we discussed before that migrated south after 4,000 years ago. And then we got it in Ghana. According to the Nana Asaman tradition of the Kemetic origin of the Akan, you got subclades among the Akan in ECTS 6487 and EZ5958 that are connected to those same haplogroups that originated Lake Chad Basin, migrated north from 10 to 4,000 years ago, and then migrated south back into Western Central Africa after the desiccation of the Saharan zone. And then you have the same thing in the first dynasty of ancient Kemet, right? You find some subclades of these lineages among the Wolof in Senegal, validating the Euro-Diao tradition, as well as Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop's pluridisciplinary analysis of a Kemetic origin of the Wolof and Senegambian people. And look at here in the Mande, specifically the Soninke people. You see subclades from pre-dynastic Kemet, right? And it validates the orature of Yusu Tata Sise and Samba Jali Jabate in identifying the Mande ancestral nation of Korutumu Ba, or the Great Water, along ancient Kemet and Kush, confirming that a Baladi man named Yugu Dungusi is the ancestor of Dinga Sise, the founder of the Wagadu Empire and the Soninke people. So obviously here you see again these same subclades, that are connected to that migration south after the desiccation of the Sahara in modern West Africans, particularly the Soninke and more importantly, the Wagadu Empire. So yet again, the oral narratives of modern Western Central Africans is corroborating with the contemporary genetic evidence. So right here we chilling with the Songhai in the Niger River Valley, and you have the tradition of Dia Alayaman that details the Kemetic origin of the Songhai people, and then you have A1B1 and EM2 subclades from pre-dynastic Kemet among the Songhai, right on the Niger River Valley or the Jaliba River Valley. Look at that EV3862 and that AV2818 coming from these same haplogroups found located in Northeast Africa among ancient Kemet and ancient Kush. We're going to get it with the Swahili. We already spoke about that EM293, but they got EM2 and EM35 subclades that originated among pre-dynastic Kemet and corroborate with archaeologist Dr. Felix Chami's analysis of the classical Happy River Valley roots of the Swahili civilization. Now we got the same thing with the Yoruba and the Igbo, right? We already discussed the autosomal links, but if you look at these EM2 subclades, they validate the Akpani Okoronkwo among the Igbo and the Awujali of Ujebuland that detail the ancient Kimi roots of both the Igbo and the Yoruba people. It's them same subclades in EL 649 and ECTS 1536, right? And I do believe that this is my last slide. It's my last slide. But we got that EM2 subclade EY230-129, and that's E1B1A1A1A1C2C3B, and that's found in the 20th dynasty of ancient Kimi, right? So then you got the EBY102326 and EFT397246 subclades of that EY230-129 are found among the Fula of modern Gambia, and they link to the 20th dynasty of ancient Kimi. And with that, I'm concluding my presentation. Thank y'all for tuning in. It's been a blast. And honestly, the detractors are done. We done killed a dead Equus formicabulus, and we in this thing.
Fatality.
Jeez, I don't even know. I don't even know if we should have a round robin or just just put the last nail in the coffin and just say our eulogy and move on to the next one. What y'all got? Any Magi's in the build? Any archers in the build?
Let me just say, Cam, flawless victory. Man, that was in the spirit of Robert Brown and the Magi Archers. Man, that's the way you're supposed to do it with primary documentation and sources. They always ask for experts, and I think you brought probably. I didn't think anybody could outdo Robert with the 20-something, but I think you might have did. I didn't even count. I wish I would have started counting. I might have to go back. But man, this was beautiful. Appreciate your efforts, and I know it took time out your family's life, so appreciate them as well.
Oh yeah, definitely did. I appreciate the love and honor. Hey, hit the Cash App, Cash App $ Kamjiverse. Pass the collection plate. I would definitely appreciate it.
Word.
All the love and support. I definitely appreciate it because this took a minute. It took a minute for me to do all this research. I ain't even gonna lie. It took me some time.
Great
Well, we
presentation.
do appreciate
Cam,
the effort that you
peace
put
to
into
God.
your.
Yeah, blessings, Cam. You know what I mean? I ain't gonna lie, G. You know what I mean? This was a slaughter fest. You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? Almost. Nah, I ain't even gonna say that. I'm glad you did what you did, King. I'm so happy. I'm so relieved because, King, the way that you connected, ancient Kemet to West Africa, Central Africa, South Africa, you know what I mean, was absolutely divine, God. This was miraculous. This was absolutely magnificent in every sense of those words, King. No one could present this any better than what you did today. This was absolutely fantastic. I mean, King, and this was well worth the wait, God. This was supremely and superbly prepared, King. You know what I'm saying? I salute you for your research, King. I salute you 1,000 times, God, for the effort and the focus and the diligence that you have attributed to this presentation, man. This was absolutely incredible, God. You know what I'm saying? They're dead. If anybody at this point, you listen to anybody on the PKs, well, in particularly Gullah Geechee or Ngozi, then you just at this point you just a detractor You're no longer ignorant to the information. You choose to be a fool. You choose to detract. You choose to be delusional. You choose to be anti-black. The information is undeniable.
X.
This is undeniable. It is no way after this presentation that you can continue that same BS rhetoric, spewing nonsense, and you have not seen a single source ever presented from Ngozi. Ever. And anything that you ever see from Gullah was some Wikipedia bullshit. Some frame in the narrative shit. This man presented true scholarship in its utmost fashion. Man, Cam, 1,000 arrows salutes. God, you a dangerous magi. Man, I'm anxious to see the next one. Keep going, keep studying, keep pushing. Don't let up, because this is, and I want to say this is for the people, for our beautiful black people, more than it is for a detractor. Y'all just a and one. They take your head off and your anti-blackness. That's the and one. But this is for our beautiful people, for the love that we have for each other, for the love of Africa, for the love of black excellence, for the love of black unity, for the love of black power, black divinity, black history. And King, I'm thankful, man. Shout out to Smash Rockwell. You know what I'm saying? King, you a magnificent God. Man, the way the Magi flocking to the King, man, the way that we grouping like this, man, this is divine. All of us kings in our rightful sense. Man, Cam, this is beautiful. Let's keep stepping on next, man. This, man, we big stepping, no side sevens, on God.
I appreciate it. Appreciate everything. This is only the beginning. You know, this is only the first presentation in a long list of presentations. I want to give a shout out to No BS Top 5 Comparables. He gifted 5 memberships to my channel, to Scarab Chronicles, Jay, Mega, One Brother, and Power Up Visual. Shout out to y'all. Shout out to Corvus Glaive in the comments and Marlon Dopeson. I appreciate all the love.
Yo, I'm just gonna say, stomping with them big black boots through that Amat, that Kemet, alluvial black soil, arches up. I'm speechless, dog. This was magnificent. Excellent presentation.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that love. Shoot. You may even have to do an after party, low key.
Yeah. Let me see. Yeah, that's what
For
I was
sure.
about to say. I don't want to let this go on for too much longer to make editing up later too much harder. So everybody who watching, we about to come right back, and then I'm gonna open up the Zoom so cats can chime in. So I'm stopping the stream right now. I want to say thank you for allowing that presentation to be on my channel, Kamji.